Hey, lads, Phil Sports here, and coming at you live from the attic, and trying to get back into the gaming scene. And with my friend Pork recommending Blue Sky to me, I'm going to try and just keep that game only. So, first video I've done these in a while, but I wanted to do a video as a recap of some things that I've played recently, and give quick feedback on stuff. So not like an in-depth review, but just kind of initial feelings type of thing. And hopefully you'll find it a little bit, I don't know, helpful if you're looking at any of these games yourself. First game I wanted to talk about was played at GaleCon here in Dublin, and that was like beginning of November, end of October Bank Holiday weekend. That's what it was. We played a victory lost with 3 players. And a victory lost is a hex encounter game. Got the map out here so y'all can see the map. Hex encounter game that's played in and around the Ukraine, kind of like from Stalingrad to the Dnieper, and post Battle of Stalingrad. And it's a chit pull system, which was developed by the Japanese designer, Nakamura. His first name I'm forgetting, Tetsuo maybe? And he's got a few games using this system where you draw a chit from a cup, hidden cup, and that chit will tell you which HQ on the map you can activate. And you need to activate an HQ to activate the pieces that are within the command range of that HQ. So the really nice thing, here's an example of an HQ in the game. It's the Kempf. Oop, that's terrible. Kempf HQ for the Nazis. And what you would do is, here's his matching counter. So you would draw that Kempf out of the cup. And then here's his matching counter with a command range of 6 and a movement of 10. So what you would do is any chit you had within 6 hexes of Kempf, when you drew him from the cup, you could activate for a movement in combat. And it's really cool because this system kind of reduces, for me at least, some of the cognitive load I find with hex encounter games, which takes me a while to think about how I want to push pieces around the map, and then if you got to push them all at once in one big move in combat turn, for me it can be a little daunting. So playing with 3 was perfect. We had our most experienced player, Chris, played as the Germans, and then myself and Porek split command of the Soviets. So that meant we each basically had like 4 HQs to run. It worked out really well. Didn't have a massive headache after leaving the con. A couple years back, we had played a Victory Awaits, which uses the same system, but it's about Barbarossa. There is a Victory Complete, which comes after Victory Lost. And then there's also another designer's done a game on Königsberg. I've heard other friends of mine who rate that one really highly, maybe the best out of all the series and the concept. So really liked it. There was a lot of back and forth on the map. The Nazi armored units can cover a lot of ground. That's kind of their benefit of the open ground. And so if you, as the Soviets, don't think about how you're going to cut them off from racing back to push you out of a victory city, then you're going to be in trouble, because the Germans will be able to race back, and then they're going to have a lot more strength there to push you out. With also the Soviets run into the problem of you out race your HQs, and then you get these guys in good points in victory cities that you want to take to win. However, once your HQ gets out there, he's kind of out in the wilderness, right? One of the chits for the Soviet player is called the Stavka chit, so it's kind of like the General HQ chit. And when you have, sorry, there's a cat here on there. When you have the Stavka chit pulled, that means that every HQ, Soviet HQ on the map, can activate. This allows you really to sort of get an extra attack with your main HQs that you want to be your spearhead guys, but also catch up your straggling units who are falling behind, kind of where you're punching through with your spearheads. The only downside of the Stavka chit is that it can be a very long turn. It's a lot of parts to move around when it gets pulled, and that was even with 2 of us playing as the Soviets. So bear that in mind. If you're not real familiar with hex and counter games, this system is a brilliant way to jump into them. Multi-Man Publishing is the publisher. It's the hex and counter rules are very straightforward, and if you have any familiarity with hex and counter games, you'll pick them up really quickly. And even if you don't, it won't take too long for you to realize how it works and is meant to work. There are like no exceptions, and the only kind of I won't call it a difficulty, but the only kind of game specific, there we go, hex and counter rule that you'll encounter involves going across rivers, minor and major river hex sites, and how that works. The game is also not very bloody, so the way the CRT works, which I think I've got a blown up version of it. So yeah, here's the CRT blown up, and essentially a lot of the, you're going to be over on this end more 2-to-1, 3-to-1s, maybe the occasional 4-to-1, and most of the results are just retreats. The DR2 causes 2-step losses, but the DRs are just retreats. So what that means is, unless you've planned out the attack in such a way that you've surrounded your German units that you're trying to eliminate, unless you have that accomplished, they're just going to be able to retreat and often not have any step losses inflicted. So you've got to think about how you're going to pocket the Germans, which is, I believe, accurate to the actual campaign, which is cool. But it does kind of take some more planning and foresight on your end as the commander of the forces. And so I think with after one full play through, you'll kind of grasp that the CRT itself is not real bloody, and the game is focused on surrounding and eliminating enemy units in that way. So very cool. Really like this one. Check it out if you're into East Front, World War II, hex and counter, any of it. We had a game giveaway from GMT at GaleCon, GMT Games, and I actually won the raffle. I've won it twice now at GaleCon. Lucky me. Last time I got Colonial Twilight, the coin system game. This time I had to pick between Here I Stand and the new coin game, People Power, about the Philippines. Went for Here I Stand with the thinking of, I played this game 5 or 6 times, I think, myself, and maybe I could do some videos of, like, teach to play. And then also there's a 2-player system, which I'm just kind of interested to check out to see if it works at all. So, yay, GMT, thank you. Then we went away for the weekend to Tipperary and played games all weekend, myself and Porik. And the first game we tried out, because it was a lighter one, was Pax Porfiriana from, this is a Phil Eklund Pax game, one of the original ones, published by Sierra Madre Games, although I will note that if you look it up online, there is currently, I think it's a Game Found project where there's an Ultimate Edition of Pax Porfiriana, and the Ultimate Edition includes a whole second era of cards. So this game takes place during the Mexican Revolution, where Porfirio Diaz gets toppled eventually, but it's a gigantic mess for anybody familiar with the history of it. So we're talking late 19th century until about the early 1920s, something like that. And the game is a tableau builder where you buy cards from the market, and those cards represent things from individual personalities like Henry Ford or some of the revolutionary generals in the game, or the Zapatistas, to ranches, mines, banks, to, soldiers like the Texas Rangers or different revolutionary fronts operating, or the Federale soldiers. And what you're doing is playing all these different cards into your tableau to score enough of specific points like outrage or revolution, and what you're playing toward is a victory condition in the event that the Diaz regime collapses with a topple card, which is like the coup card in a coin game, I guess. But the specific regime has to match your high scoring points on the tableau. I'm not explaining this super well. But for example, one game I was playing with my leader who could add an extra outrage point. So I was trying to focus on outrages. And the outrage is kind of like the opposite number of the U.S. intervention governmental stance. And the U.S. intervention stance is like the United States has moved into Mexico and sort of, or at least northern Mexico, and sort of operating as if it's a vassal state there at the time. So you need the government in that certain position in order to be able to spend your points to try and win the game. Super clever game. We only played it with 2 players, and it was fun. I think with 3 or 4, it would be even better, like even more chaotic in a good way. There's you get a market of cards, but there's 200 cards in the game, right? So every game is going to be completely different, and there'll be cards that you don't see. So you can't really plan for one specific card. The victory system, like I was talking about, I found that really clever. You can do things in the game to hurt your opponent. There's these orange cards, which like might start a strike at one of your mines, for example. But when you give it and hurt your opponent, one of their mines, it would start a strike at one of your opponent's mines. But you also give the opponent some kind of benefit or scoring points from that outrage or revolution or command, right? So it's not straightforward. Sometimes you can try and hurt your opponent and wind up giving them the thing that they need to win. Tons of player interaction. Even though you're working on your own tableaus, you really have to be mindful of what your opponent's doing on their tableau and how you can mess with their plans. Compared to, say, like, I don't have it here, but Race for the Galaxy is one of my favorite games, and also a tableau builder. But there's not that kind of combative interaction. Race for the Galaxy is more about building your own engine. Pax Por is like build your own engine, but also mess with the other guy's engine, right? Really, really nice. And it also allows you to kind of work your way back into the game. So we had a situation in one game we played where the economy went into deficit. And because of that, it was really hard to make money, but I kind of gained an advantage from that the way I was set up. So I had looked like a great head start over Pork, my opponent. But in the end, he was able to claw back and make me work to get to that victory condition, right? So you might never be totally dead in this one, which is nice, especially if you're playing with 3 or 4 players. So I'm really, after playing this one and having played Pax Pamir, which is Cole Worley's take on the Pax system, and is a game about the Great Game in Afghanistan in the 19th century. I want to play the other tableau building Pax games. Pax Renaissance probably is next on the list. So really, really nice. And then the final thing about this one, Pax Porfiriana, that I really liked was that the rulebook had a nice glossary, and as well as an index. But the nice part about the glossary was if you needed to check like quickly a concept in the game, we were able to just flip to the glossary and get most of our questions answered. So that was really nice. So definite 2 thumbs up for that one. It's been the star, I think, game of what I've played recently. Then we tried out from Nuts Publishing. You're nuts. This War Without an Enemy, about the English Civil War. And this one is, which is cool, card-driven game that uses blocks. Super inventive. So like your typical CDGs, each event card is going to have a number of action points you can spend, but then you spend the action points to do things with your blocks on the map, which is rad. And if anybody's a fan of block games, I love them. The great thing about block games is it adds a whole level of tension to the game of not knowing where stuff is. And in this one of the people you're trying to find would be the king. because if you, as the parliamentarians, can kill the king, you win, right? But he's hidden. He's a hidden block, so you got to kind of try and, if you want to go that route, suss out where he's at on the map. So yeah, cool game, really cool game. Inventive design with the card plays. Pop some cards out there. Cool events. Some of the events require some planning too. So there's a deck, and there's a deck if you're the royalist, and there's a deck if you're the parliamentarians. So you use those events to build your forces up over time. The game looks really good. Comes with this. I'm not gonna. I can put the whole map out here. Comes with this big old fold out old style map of England and the environs, right? Great artwork on it. You get a battle board to fight your battles on, which is a cool process. You get nice little setup cards for the scenarios. You get these player aids. And the rulebook's nice and glossy. Okay. And like the artwork on the dudes on your blocks. This light's terrible to figure this out for next time. But the artwork on these blocks, like this is a London regiment. Super cool. Great, that kind of stuff. Production-wise was good. I give Nuts a thumbs up for the components and for the artwork. I was in the rulebook more than Porrick, because this was my pick, so I was teaching. The rules were not good. They could stand a complete rewrite, so that seems like a development part that dropped. Also, we were just talking about index and glossary and the Pax Porfiriana. And this one, there's no index or glossary, which is just like, shouldn't be allowed anymore. When it comes to these games, we need to demand them. Somebody has put an index on BGG. That would certainly be helpful. But there's situations where rules are buried in other rules, like how does the winter phase work, for example, is buried within a second rule, and it's funny because it looks great, right? The way the rule book is laid out, and then there's all kinds of little icons and tables and stuff pointing to other places in the rules that are relevant, but the rule book as a whole doesn't work very good. So you need somebody who's familiar with the game to get you into it. It's a little complex, right? It's more complex than even I like Europe engulfed or Asia engulfed for block games. This is more complex. You've got the complexity of adding in the event cards and action points, and then the way battles work are more complex using the battle board. It's cool. The complexity is good and era appropriate. So it's really nice how there's little chromy bits all over how the battles work, how retreat works, how pursuit works, how the artillery works in a siege, and whether or not you break the walls down, how your units are tied to their home regions. It's all kinds of cool little chrome. The issue is it's hard to suss it out through the rule book until you start playing the thing, so you have a very good chance that you're going to play your first time wrong, essentially, I think is what it is. One complaint we had with this one is that the way the action points allow you to move, you can move 2 areas in each movement action, and because of that, you can spend multiple action points and move up to 8 areas within one card play. I get why it's in the game, I think, for purposes of the gameplay, but as Porrick pointed out, it sort of breaks the historical immersion when the parliamentarians, take York and then march their troops from York to Bristol to try and relieve Bristol within one card play. Right, so I'm with Porrick on that one. I understand why it's there, because the game system might not work without it, but it felt gamey. That's what it is when we were doing it, right? The battles were a lot of fun. The cool part about how the battles are set up is that each arm of your military, so your cav, your artillery, and your foot are all important and have different roles to play, which are kind of like their historical ones. There's also a system in which your cavalry can go out of control and pursue off the battle board on their own, which is very true to form. I think especially the royalists in particular had problems with their cavalry discipline and their cavalry running off the board and trying to run down retreating parliamentarians. So, and like I said, I love the art of the game. Looks really good. The map looks like incredible. But then you run into this issue on the map. I'm not going to pull the whole thing out again, but actually, I don't know if I can get it with the setup bit here. Yes. So the setup page will show us kind of the whole map. And you've got, like, all this Scottish area is not going to get used. You're basically just lining up your blocks in Scotland and moving them into the north. There might be an intervention, but you don't need all the Scottish space. You don't necessarily need all the sea space. The continents down here, that could be, up here closer. Ireland, same deal. Like, you're not moving around Ireland. And there's just some... So what happens is you've got these very large... It's trying to be, I guess, geographically accurate, but in the process, you're going to jam a lot of your blocks in this region, in the Midlands and around London, and there's a bunch of spaces. So, like, there's a space outside London, there's Oxfordshire, Leicester has its own space, Leicestershire, Staffordshire has its own space, Gloucestershire has its own space, Bristol's within its own space, and Dorset is nearby. So what happens is you wind up ramming a bunch of blocks into that center area, and they could have, as beautiful as the map is, done a better job of making the map playable. The other thing is, like, these mountain spaces, the mountain artwork does not always coordinate with what are the mountain spaces. There's only 3 of them, although you see mountains in multiple spaces, so that's a goofy art decision. I found the rivers a little bit hard to follow as far as breaking up spaces. I think the art could have been more clear on those, because what type of boundary is between 2 adjacent spaces controls how many blocks can move back and forth. So it's an important part of the map, but sometimes it's hard to suss out or remember. So as great as it looks like a painting almost, it's not necessarily as functional as it should be. So that's something to keep in mind. But anyway, I would play it again. Really enjoyed the game. I think, especially if you're into that era of history, it'd be a really good one to try. And with all the there's a lot of both strategic and almost down to tactical level gameplay with it, which is kind of neat. So it merits further playing. It wouldn't be like the first one to come out every time for me, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to play it again. Looking forward to it. So that's This War Without an Enemy by Nuts Publishing. And then the final game I've played recently, which was new to me, is Nevsky by GMT Games. And the design is a Volko Ruhnke design. And Nevsky's I can't remember if it's the first game, but I believe it's the first game in his levy and campaign system, which is a completely whole cloth new system to game these, God, what would you call it? Early Middle Ages, kind of operational level conflicts. Nevsky is about the Rus, who are, I guess, Russians by this point, fighting an invasion off from the Teutonic Knights, who at this point, the Teutonic Knights were, I guess, of Germanic origin and had taken over a lot of the Baltics for themselves and had started raiding and looking east to take on Russia. At the same time, Russia was dealing with Mongols in the east themselves, so they were sort of distracted. So you can either play as the Teutons, where you're invading, or you can play as the Russians with Novgorod as sort of your stronghold. And as the Russians, who I played as, you're waiting for your princes to come back. Andre and, I forget the other one, Alexander and Andre. So you're waiting for these princes to come back into the fold so that you can levy them recruit them onto the map and then start levying items for them to use. Nevsky focuses and the system focuses on the supply aspect of campaigning during this time period, which means that you will recruit a number of lords to the map, and your lords will be represented by a counter which you move around the map in a point-to-point system. But then your lords will also have a mat of their own, which you'll have in front of yourself as the player. And on the mat of the lords, you will keep their military assets, so like their knights, sergeants at arms, men at arms, light horse. There's a lot of different unit types, militiamen, and even the Russians can bring on a peasant levy. So you'll have all those bits to represent your military forces on their lord's card, but also, and probably more importantly, on your lord's card, you will track their transport. So the transport that's available to them, because you need the transport to be able to move around the map. And transport are wooden carts, horse-drawn carts, boats, riverine boats, which are obviously key for moving around a lot of this part of the world at this time. Rus, the name Rus of Russia, potentially comes from the Old Norse word for rower, meaning a rower. So this is how they first got into Russia in the first place. We're rowing these, I guess not too dissimilar from like the canoes that the French voyageur would have used in North America. So you have those boats you can move around. You have ships, which can take you through the Baltic and land you at different ports and do like sea invasions. And then you have sleds, because the weather changes. And when it freezes over, you can only use sleds to get around. Okay, so you got to remember those items. And then you also will have, for your lords, provisions. I forget the exact term that's used in the game. It's something similar to provisions or food. So you got to feed your troops as well to move them. Okay, you can either feed them by supplying it in, if you've got enough carts and such to supply it in from a supply capital, or you can forage in a location to collect the food needed to move around with, or you can ravage your opponent's locations and take the food from there. So a lot of the game focuses on this play between where do you want to get your lords on the map, and countered by what resources do you have available on your lord's map to make them do it on the lord's mat, to make them move and get there on the map. For me, I felt like, and maybe it's just because it was our first playthrough too, I guess that's got to be part of it. I felt very much like I was fighting against the system more than I was fighting against the Teuton invaders. And our game sort of devolved into this situation where we each had a lord running around in our home territory, just ravaging location by location, without much incentive to spend transport or food on trying to stop them from doing it, I guess. So that was odd, because you score victory points either by taking locations in a siege, which is very difficult to do. Not difficult, but you need a lot of lords concentrated in one location generally to be able to take an area via siege. So that scores you 1, 2, or 3 victory points. And then each ravage, which you can do at any location on the map, even like the wild forested locations, will gain you half a victory point. So sort of the low-hanging fruit is to run around and just ravage places, as opposed to going into battle, which battles in the system are very swingy. And we didn't play, you're supposed to play with screens which hide your units from each other. But because it was our first playthrough, we didn't use the screens. So even with seeing the constitution of my opposing lord's forces, I still wasn't very sure on what the hell was going to happen if I decided to go to battle. So eventually we just went to battle to see how it works. And then that makes you realize that it can be very swingy. So yeah, I felt like, the other thing I would say about this game is the art is incredible. Like if you're into the area as a period piece, from the box art with the bright blue to the fonts used throughout to the lord's mats, the component quality is just off the charts. GMT killed it with this one, and I would assume with the rest of the Levian campaign system as well. So for me, I don't think I'll be investing any more time into Levian campaign. I didn't care for the experience of arranging to move enough to want to keep digging into it. I'm sure as you played it more, because it is complex, that some of those nuances will become secondhand as you're getting accustomed to the game system and remembering what you need to plan for in the event that you want to get your lord to a certain area. But for me, I felt like a lot of, especially on the tabletop, and I'm sitting across from somebody in that scenario, I play these games for conflict. So I want to be able to strategize and try and trip up the other players' planning. Whereas in this one, it was almost like the game was tripping up my own planning, or I was tripping my own planning up and falling over my own 2 feet all the time. Yeah, so it was for me. I won't be digging back into it. Not that the design is bad. Like, you have to appreciate the level of thought and complexity that Volko put into designing this system specific to this era. Because I'm sure, from my reading of history in this time, which is not great, but I know a bit about it, I think it does sort of capture the logistical trouble with campaigning in these regions, which were super underdeveloped and usually relied on river networks more than anything to conduct trade and to move people around, as opposed to the cart networks that were getting built. So, yeah, but just for me, it's not a system I'm going to dig into. So it might be for you. I would definitely check it out. It's worth a check out, especially I think if you can get somebody to teach you to play that has played the system before and can explain to you what you need to think about if you're planning on moving your guys from A to B. I just want to be able to move my guys on the map easier. I think that was a big part of it. And then I want to know, if I go fight, what are the potential outcomes. So, yeah. So that was Nevsky. And fortunate to say I've played these games over the last while. I'm going to try and do more of these type of videos. I'll try and do more of the how to play type of videos and even little play recap videos as I get stuff up on the table. So back into gaming. And yeah, hope you found this one helpful and look forward to hearing from you if you have any comments. Thanks.